My guest today on Behas with Barkha is author Suketu Mehta, the author, of course, of Maximum City, as well as a new book on the hot potato subject of migration and immigrants. This Land is Our Land. His next book is also going to be out soon, and it's going to be a magnum opus on New York City. Suketu, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Let me start by asking you, when you set out to write this book on migration, did you have any sense of how much of a volatile, contemporary, relevant subject this would be, not just in your country, which is now the United States of America, but even here in India?
Well, I started writing this book on migration because I could sense that this giant backlash against migration happening, particularly in the Western world. And the book really began with a story that my grandfather once told me. My grandfather was born in rural Gujarat, and he worked in Kenya, and then he retired in London. So one day in the 1990s, he's sitting in a park in North London, minding his own business. And this elderly British gent comes up to him and says to my Dadaji, he says, "Why are you here? Why don't you go back to your country?" And my grandfather, being a good Gujju Baniya, says, "Well, because we are the creditors. You came to my country, you took all my gold and my diamonds, so we have come to collect. We are here," my grandfather said, "because you were there." So that seemed to me, a really succinct summary of the reasons that people move to the West, that my family moved, that Latin Americans are moving to the US, that Africans are moving to Europe. It's because the rich countries, through colonialism, which was then replaced by corporate colonialism, war, and economic inequality, and most significantly, climate change. Through these things, they have stolen the future of the poor countries. So when people are moving, they're really moving because they've come to collect. So I started writing this book because of this backlash that was developing. It really began after Trump's election in 2016.
And was it, how much of it was personal for you? You leave India and Bombay, Mumbai as it's known now, at the age of what, 14?
14.
And what do you understand of that moment? Do you believe that you're just going away for a short period and you're going to be back home? Does your notion of home alter? And what happens then to your sense of identity and belonging?
So it was the central event of my life. At the age of 14, I left with my parents and my younger sisters. We moved from Bombay to New York to expand the family diamond business. And when I was moving, I had no idea what America would be like. The only time I left India was when I was a year old for a year to go to Nairobi with my mom. But I had no idea how big an effect this would have on my life. Since then, I've been going back and forth. Obviously, I came back to Bombay to write Maximum City, but then I moved back again. I've also lived in France, I've lived in England, I've lived in Brazil. So I'm kind of a global Gujju.
A global Gujju.
Yeah. Which is actually very true of my community in general. 1 out of 3 overseas Indians is Gujarati. So we have been moving, for millennia now. We've been moving in search of trade. We've been moving because the farmland in Gujarat wasn't rich enough to support the people. We've also been moving because the British really never developed Gujarat. So we had to move overseas to other parts of the British Empire, like my grandfather did. So Gujaratis are migrants par excellence, and my family is migrants twice removed because my grandfather moved to Nairobi, my mom was born there, and then she only came back to India for a few years when she got married to my father and moved again to America. So we know what it is like to be kind of global citizens, and I think we've benefited by it. In my family, we've always known, as most Gujaratis do, that mobility is survival.
So it's interesting that you describe the Gujju community, as it were, and this phrase global Gujju, as a kind of people who do move and who are used to moving. It's ironic because today the two most powerful men or women in this country, across genders, are Narendra Modi and Amit Shah. Both are from Gujarat, both are Gujjus to that extent. And their new policy on citizenship and migration, some of it already legislated, some of it in the pipeline, has caused the kind of domestic storm that I think we haven't seen for many years. Have you been following the debate on the new citizenship legislation?
I've been following it very closely. I've spoken out against the new bills.
What have you understood of it and why have you spoken out?
So what I'm understanding, the 2002 anti-Muslim pogroms in Gujarat made me ashamed to be Gujarati. I've grown up with extreme religious bigotry. Both of my grandfathers were in the RSS. I still have lots of family in Ahmedabad. The 1969 riots in Ahmedabad were some of the worst in post-independence Indian history. In my Bombay book, I've written about the Shiv Sena and their role in the riots. And there's obviously been a long history of anti-Muslim rioting in Gujarat.
And some of it has been enabled by the Congress party, and while the Congress has been in power, including in your hometown of Mumbai.
Absolutely. It's not just the BJP. There is, obviously there's been a history of Hindu-Muslim fights, riots. Much of it was deliberately created by the British. I mean, that's how they ruled us. It's divide and rule. Unfortunately, we have become British in the sense that we are now dividing and ruling within India. And what I've said is, this is the second largest Muslim country in the world. We have 200 million Indian Muslims. They're as Indian as you or me. Mm-hmm. Now they're being told systematically, the message is being given to them, whether it's Kashmir, whether it's the citizenship bill, whether it's the NRC, whether it's the Babri Masjid verdict, that you are somehow not Indian. If you're not Hindu, you can't be Indian. And my Indian Muslim friends, whether they're here or living abroad, they have a sense of unease which I have never seen in my life. I think it's the most perilous time for Indian democracy since India came into existence.
So let me unpack some of those things. So I have a stated position on the citizenship legislation and the proposed National Register of Citizens. So I'm not going to pretend that I support them. I think my view is out there. But I do have to still unpack and push you on some of the points you made. One, the government continues to argue that this is a legislation that simply fast-tracks citizenship for non-Muslims from 3 Muslim countries, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. And it is, in fact, therefore benign. It is actually offering persecuted minorities a place to come home to. And if you want a friendly migration policy, well, here it is. How would you respond to that?
Well, why enumerate every single religion except Islam? And why only have these 3 countries? I've been to Sri Lanka 8 or 9 times. There are persecuted minorities there. What about the Rohingya? I mean, one could make an argument that they're the single most persecuted minority in the world today. If we are to really present this as a policy of refuge to minorities, then it should be open to anyone. There shouldn't be an Islam exception. And, we all know that the messaging really is that this is a Hindu country. And Muslims who are in India, they can stay here as long as they're quiet. I mean, these are people who voted with their feet. During partition, they didn't go to Pakistan or what is now Bangladesh. They stayed here. And to now tell them, somehow otherize them, this is incredibly dangerous, even if it's just as a matter of self-interest. And Gujaratis are above all pragmatic. I mean, by 2060, India will be the world's largest Muslim country.
In the world?
In the world. Right now, around 15% of the country is Muslim. By 2060, we'll have replaced Indonesia as the world's largest Muslim country, and around 20% will be Muslim. And there's really very little that anyone can do. Even in the RSS's wildest dreams, they can't actually kick out hundreds of millions of Muslims. They're here, they're going to stay, and they're going to grow. So we need to understand how to live together as we have been, India has been for millennia. We've lived together, and obviously there have been riots and wars and insurrections. But the glory of India is that we're not like so many of our neighbors, that we are a secular country. We're not a Hindu country, and we really have to deal with this, that we belong people of all religions and also people of no religions. The reason I call myself a Hindu is because it's the one religion which allows for all the other religions. Really, anyone can come into the fold and consider themselves Hindu, even those who are atheists.
I mean, Javed Akhtar, who is an atheist, actually once said to me that the tragedy is that you now see a kind of organized Hindutva that is actually mirroring fundamentalist Islam. This is his quote, and that Hinduism was always the antithesis of this because it was never this codified set of beliefs.
Yeah, there's no 10 commandments, there's no Pope. I mean, who is a Hindu?
Do you identify as Hindu?
I absolutely identify.
And what does that mean to you?
Well, so I come from the Gujarati Nagarvaniya community, right? And the great Gujarati saint poet Suketu Mehta, who wrote Vaishnav Janato Tene Kahi and kind of formed modern
and
Gujarati.
Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan.
And my favorite bhajan. I mean, it's a beautiful bhajan. If you want to know what a true Gujarati is, it's the Vaishnav Jana that Narsi defines in that bhajan. He says a true Vaishnav is one who feels other people's pain as his own, one who never speaks ill of anyone else, one who is never conceited, never boasts of his 56-inch chest. So the idea is that the true Vaishnav is someone who is inclusive, who's open, who feels other people's pain as his own, who welcomes them into his home. This is what the history of Gujarat has been. The Parsis first came to Gujarat. I've grown up with Gujarati Muslims, with Khojas and Maimans and Bohras. There are Gujarati Christians, there are even Gujarati Jews. So there's been a very long tradition of this kind of syncretism, this openness within Gujarat, which is now being challenged by these two who have claimed to set themselves up as the representatives of all Gujaratis. And I strenuously agree.
You say they claim to, but the fact is the people of Gujarat in election after election after election voted for the BJP. It's Gujarat that offers, in a sense, the stage from which Modi catapults to the post of Prime Minister. Without those terms in Gujarat, Mr. Modi would not be Prime Minister today. So obviously the vast majority of your home state think differently.
Well, they started thinking differently not that long ago. I mean, there was this Kham alliance which kept the Congress in power, right? Kshatriya, Harijan, Adivasi, Muslim. And I think in the 2002 riots, when somehow some of the lower caste Hindus started joining the upper caste Hindus in these anti-Muslim pogroms, that's when that alliance was shattered. And it's had tragic consequences for Gujarat and for the country as a whole. I do agree that, many people think, all Gujaratis must be like Modi or Shah or Adani. Somehow just distrustful of Muslims, spreading this kind of false narrative. It's true, Modi is enormously popular among my fellow Gujaratis in America. I mean, there was a rally in Madison Square Garden, 35,000 screaming Gujaratis. He was the Gujarati Elvis. I mean, there's something magnetic about his...
The rock star cult following.
Yeah, and he knows how to give a good speech. But there are also lots of Gujaratis who are pushing back against this. Gujarati writers, intellectuals, also ordinary Gujaratis who, in the end, we're pragmatic and we're migrants. We know that if we attack migrants in India, if we, demonize, let's say, Bangladeshis, then we ourselves can be demonized where we live in Dubai or South Africa or the UK or the US.
To which the Modi government would say, as they said to Satya Nadella's remarks, that the legal process of citizenship is available to all, including to Muslim migrants, and all that's happened here is the exceptionalism is on the fast track process. And the second thing is, the exceptionalism is that even if you come in illegally and you're non-Muslim, you are immune from detention centers and migrant camps. So we may, yes, see a situation where only Muslim migrants are in camps. Is this a little bit like Trump's Muslim ban? It's not exactly that because there's no ban here. So we have to clarify that. But even in America, considered the freest country in the world, there was nothing that could be done to stop Trump's religious exceptionalism on the migration policy.
It was and is wrong in America, and it was and is wrong in India today. There's kind of a worldwide Islamophobia. It's become like I slam, you slam, we all slam Islam. and it's deeply destructive in America. In America, there's been tremendous pushback against it. It's only because Trump packed the Supreme Court with his Republican appointees that whole Muslim ban is kind of a reality right now. But there were lots of lawyers, who went out to the airports in America when this ban was announced and represented Muslims trying to get into the country. A country shouldn't be defined just by its paranoia. So when the government here makes these arguments saying, well, it's not targeted at Indian Muslims, it's about people who try and persecuted minorities in other countries, then there shouldn't be an Islam exception. The reason people are having a problem with this law is that for the first time in independent India's history, there's been one religion that's specifically been excluded from a law meant to benefit everyone. Why is there an Islam exception? If you really want to help persecuted minorities in the neighboring countries, then just say that. Say that. What about the Ahmadiyas in Pakistan? They're certainly a persecuted minority. Why can't they have the same advantage as a...
So the argument of the government is that these are theocracies and they are Muslim nations, so you cannot use Muslims as an illustration of persecuted minorities. I'm just telling you the argument from the other side. But let me be contrarian here and push you on how India is being viewed in the world. So one thing that I hear repeatedly, and as someone who writes for the Washington Post, I hear it all the time from trolls, is that you guys are maligning this country on the global stage. And you have to keep saying, look, it's the policy that's the problem, not the writer, don't shoot the messenger. But how concerned should India be about our global image today?
I think it should be incredibly concerned. I teach journalism at New York University. I have friends who write for international papers and report for television stations. And India's had a good image. We're not China, we're not Pakistan. And the reason why people like to trade with India is because it's this rude, argumentative democracy, and has had at least this illusion that everyone's treated fairly equally, no matter what your religion, no matter what your economic class. That's not always been true, but that's at least been our self-image. And now that self-image is itself changing. That large sections of the country, not just the government, think of themselves as a Hindu Rashtra. So now this is making a lot of people pause. And while it's true that there's been a worldwide development of this kind of autocratic, authoritarian regimes, it's not just India, it's Brazil, it's the Philippines, it's Russia, it's Hungary. But I personally am incredibly grieved that India has chosen to join this club of authoritarian, majoritarian countries. And it's going to have an effect on India's soft power, India's image abroad. So when people are complaining about why people are writing about this way in the Washington Post or the New York Times, it's not because the Post or the Times are biased against India. It's because they are journalists and it's their job to call it as it is.
But the contrarian argument would be that, look at China. Look at what China is doing to its Muslims. Look at Saudi Arabia and what happened with Jamal Khashoggi, or how, so many other human rights curtailed, and that India, for all its flaws, does have at least a thriving electoral democracy, does still have people making noise, does still have federalism pushing back. So should we be concerned about how the world looks at us?
Well, the difference between us and China and Saudi Arabia is that China and Saudi Arabia don't pretend to be democracies. They're pretty open about it. They're dictatorships. What the emperor says goes, what the Communist Party says goes. With us, it's supposed to be, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's not supposed to be a religion of the Hindus or of the RSS. And that's what increasingly it's being seen as. It's very dangerous in the long and the short term. And you're right, there has been pushback. There's many state governments which have openly said they're not going to go along with the center's decisions. And I'm most heartened by the protests of the students. They've been magnificent across the universities of the country. Really, put their lives on the line to defend the rights of the minorities. Countries which defend the rights of the minorities, whether it's Muslims here or Indians in the UK or the US or Arabs in France also defend, as a happy side effect, the rights of the majorities. So today, if you're saying, well, it's all right, they can go after the Muslims because, it'll keep them quiet, then tomorrow they'll go after gays or women or Christians or Parsis or Sikhs. The point is that you've got to stop them the first time they go after any kind of minority, any kind of segment that the majority doesn't like. And this is where we have to draw the line in the sand. And it's not just this bill or that bill. It's an overall attitude. It's the rewriting of history textbooks. It's the attacks on writers. It's also the attacks on writers and journalists abroad, like my friend Atish Tafsir, who I think, on a technicality, had his OCI card yanked.
Now, tell me this. You've made the point that sooner or later this is actually going to impact how Indian migrants, like somewhere, because everything, the dots get connected, somewhere how the world looks at Indian migrants could also change if these policies continue. How do you then explain a kind of Howdy Modi event that takes place in the United States of America, where again you see, as you call the Prime Minister, this Gujarati Elvis, you see the stadiums packing up, you see a number of Indians in America who actually vote for the Dems but love Modi and then show up for this kind of joint Trump-Modi rally. So how do you understand this contradiction?
So it is a contradiction. In the 2016 presidential election, 87% of Indians voted for Hillary. And this might change now. That was one of the aims of the Howdy Modi event, to move the large number of Indian Americans that like Modi into also liking Trump. It's anyone's guess whether that will succeed, because Trump has made all immigrants to America really fear for their place in the country. Whether it's the Indians coming over on H-1Bs or the record number of Indians now rushing to become naturalized American citizens so that they can't be kicked out on, the next time Trump has a tantrum. But these same Indians should also realize that we can't demand fair treatment for ourselves in the United States and then be unfair to Bangladeshi migrants in India. That this is the double standard, which ultimately, it's going to really hurt us, because it's already when I write op-eds about fair treatment for migrants from the global south to the global north, I get comments saying, well, have you looked at India? Have you seen what the government is doing in India?
But India would argue that this is about illegal migrants and not about legal. Like you have to distinguish.
It's the same thing that the West says. We're all for legal migration, but it's the illegal migrants that, And so my rejoinder to this, that when people say we're against illegal migration to the West and they should respect our borders, but I say, ask yourself, has the West ever respected anyone's borders? When the British came to India, did we actually say, hold on, guys, this is, you're illegal migrants, you shouldn't be here, where's your visa? And when those people came to the colonies, they came not to work, but to invade, to loot, to pillage, right? So when we go now, or where a Bangladeshi migrant comes into India, he's not coming to rob and to rape. When a Mexican comes into the United States, he's not coming to rob or to rape. He's coming there to make a better life for himself and his family. And like it or not, global migration, as climate change really starts kicking in, is going to be the defining human phenomenon of the 21st century. You think, 5 million Syrians trying to get into Germany is a problem now. What happens when Bangladesh gets flooded and 40 or 100 million Bangladeshis have to find dry land?
But talking about Bangladesh, this is a complex issue, because in the Northeast, for example, there have been ferocious protests against this new legislation for entirely the opposite reasons. The East, or many parts of the East, would argue that these are indigenous sort of communities have been overrun by migrants, and they don't actually care about the religious dimension to it. It could be the same resentment that they feel for Hindu migrants coming in from Bangladesh. So the question is, are you arguing then that there should be no notion in today's world of the outsider, that there is nothing called the outsider?
So I'm not calling for open borders, I'm calling for open hearts. I understand that the Northeast is a special situation, and they, like the American communities along the US-Mexican border, should be given extra funding by the center, should be given assistance with their economic needs, because they are truly being overwhelmed by migrants, and the whole country should share in the costs of this kind of migration. But for my book, Barkha, I spent a lot of time with migrants in Latin America, in India, in Europe, in Morocco, in Spain, and I looked at the reasons why people are moving. Look, for all of our history as a species, we've always been moving in search of better opportunities for ourselves and our children. Global migration is a win-win for everyone. It's certainly a win for the migrants, because in many cases it's literally a chance for them to, it's the difference between life and death. It's a win for the countries they move to, because the rich countries aren't making enough babies and they need the labor of the migrants. India, we always thought we had this population problem. China thought it had a population problem. China imposed this draconian restrictions, and it's now desperately trying to increase it.
Well, we have a private members legislation seeking to basically penalize those who have more than 2 children. So this debate is also happening here.
That's another kind of anti-Muslim legislation. We all know it. It's basically, the subtext is Muslims have more children than Hindus, so it's aimed at them. It's another in this long series of messaging against Indian Muslims to kind of otherize them. But when people move, it's not because they hate their homes or their families or their foods or their culture. It's because the modern world has left them no choice. And the entire planet has to come together in some kind of compact or understanding about what to do about migration as global warming really kicks in. I mean, by the middle of the century, according to UN estimates, over 1 billion people will have to flee their homes because of climate change. Where are they going to go?
Finally, speak a little bit about how you understand your own identity as a global Gujju, as a Gujarati, at a time when India's most famous name globally is still Gandhi. Gandhi was Gujarati. The Vaishnava Janto that you speak about is also a Gujarati bhajan or a hymn. But there is also the whole notion of Gujarati Asmita, which was a Gujarati self-respect, which was this sort of instrumentalization of Modi's political base. How do you understand Gujarati identity? I say that if Gandhi were alive, I could imagine him sitting on a fast against this legislation. So, how do we make sense of these different notions of Gujarati identity, the different kinds of Gujarati leadership and philosophies that we've actually seen, and the legacy?
I believe in the Gujarati Asmita of Narsi, not Naren. I believe in this kind of compassion and fellow feeling of Gandhiji. And this, in the long run, has been the truth of Gujarat. This is a recent phenomenon, this kind of paranoia and fear. And it really, was born, frankly, out of a sense of threatened Gujarati masculinity. That first to the Muslims and then the British.
That's a controversial thing to say. Why would you say that? And why would you make that specific to the Gujaratis?
Because I see it all the time when I speak to Gujaratis, both their sense of humiliation, of emasculation, because Gujaratis generally have been thought of as, non-violent, and part of the of Gandhiji's message was that we didn't want to fight. So these new Gujaratis don't believe in satyagraha. They believe in graha more than they believe in satya. And now this fighting back, the whole RSS, Modi, Amit Shah version of Gujaratiness is centered around kind of masculinity, this wounded, threatened pride, and we're going to hit back against people who've hit us. We'll hit them first. This aggressive militarization of the border, that's all part of it. And I think, it comes from a reaction to Gandhiji's androgyny, really. I mean, when visitors came to Sabarmati, he would personally put mud packs on their abdomen and nurse them in an incredibly sort of feminine, motherly way. And I know, among my own family, people who kind of, scorn this and say, that was then, this is now, and we have to have this kind of Gujarati pride. And it's a very sort of aggressive masculine pride, which I totally reject. I believe in, my Gujarati Asmita comes from this long tradition of coexistence and openness and a sense of curiosity about the world, a confidence in traveling to other countries.
But if the BJP keeps winning elections, and it certainly has won with a historic mandate just a few months ago, what it says to me is that progressives like you, maybe even like me, do not actually have a language that people understand or that people relate to. And I think globally the world is dealing with the failure of liberal elites to basically be able to make a visceral connection with people beyond their bubbles. And isn't that something that someone like you struggles with? I mean, you live in New York, and New York is the ultimate liberal bubble. But when you step out of that bubble, I mean, Trump is possibly going to win again.
I completely agree with you. A populist like Modi, like Trump, like Duterte, Orban, Putin, on and on. A populist is a gifted storyteller. He's someone who can tell a false story well. The only way he can be fought is by telling a true story better. So we, progressives, have to become better storytellers. Too often we resort to this kind of academic language, and it's like it's on the one side this, on the other side that, or we genuinely haven't gone out and listened to the large numbers of people who are voting for the populist.
Yeah, and judge them.
Yeah, and we consider ourselves superior to them, and this is all true. In my own reporting, I've spent lots of time speaking to people who are not of the elites. Anyone who's read Maximum City knows that most of the book is decidedly about the non-elites of Bombay. So yes, we have to listen, to these people who voted for Modi, and not all of them voted for Modi because they didn't like Muslims. Most people, and particularly among Gujaratis, thought that he had done something miraculous in Gujarat. And
he would replicate that miracle nationally.
And you and I spoke during the Gujarat elections a few years ago, and I pointed out that there was no Gujarat economic miracle. There were 7 other Indian states which had a better economic record than Gujarat. And right now, Modi's talking about building all these toilets. He's actually taken the economy into the toilet. The IMF just came out with a prediction that India's growth rate now
down to 4.8%.
We're approaching the Hindu growth rate of growth, which is 3.5%. This is now the Hindutva rate of growth, 4.8 and plunging further. So this is a mass diversionary tactic from the utter failure of the government to turn around the economic ship. So they're hoping that they can distract people from the economic failure of the government by channeling this kind of rage onto the weakest, the minorities, the Muslims, the migrants. It's the same strategy that Trump's using.
Do you see Narendra Modi as Trumpian?
Well, there are big differences. He doesn't tweet as, he's not as abrasive. I think he's in many ways a much smarter man than Trump. But his effect on the country is as dangerous as the effect of Trump's on the United States. These are the 2 countries that I have citizenship of. I was a citizen of India, I was born here, and I'm a citizen of the United States. And both countries are under threat now, by these men who have taken genuine economic pain and stayed in power by channeling it onto the weakest in the country. And this is what I object to as a migrant, as a global Gujju, and as a human being.
Suketu Mehta, pleasure talking to you.